The ground shook beneath Captain Aisling Rowe's boots as the air crackled with tension. She had always known that the end would come, had even prepared for it, but never in her wildest nightmares had she imagined it would unfold like this. The alien ship, known only as the Star-Lord, loomed in the sky above Earth's last stronghold like a death sentence. Massive and looming, it dwarfed any vessel humanity had ever built. It wasn't just a ship, it was a weapon, an insurmountable force of destruction. And inside it, waiting like a predator in the shadows, was the being who would bring Earth to its knees. Aisling clenched her fists. "There has to be a way," she muttered to herself, her voice drowned by the deafening roar of fighter jets above. But deep down, she knew the truth. The Earth was lost. Her people were lost. It all started with the Zalkar. The first of their kind to make contact with humanity a decade ago, they were hailed as an advanced race, beyond anything humanity could comprehend. Their technology was staggering. Instant interstellar travel, AI beyond anything Earth had created, weapons that could reduce entire cities to ash in seconds. And, worst of all, they were merciless. 4 years, they had watched humanity, as if testing them, waiting for the right moment to strike. That moment had come. The first wave had been brutal. Major cities decimated. Armies obliterated in minutes. It was a slaughter. The Zalkar moved through Earth's defenses like a blade through paper, with nothing to stop them. Humanity, once proud of its place in the galaxy, had been rendered helpless. But there was a catch. The Zalkar had underestimated one thing: their arrogance. They hadn't expected humanity's defiance. They hadn't expected the survivors to keep fighting, to keep adapting, and to keep pushing back against all odds. The human resistance had begun in the shadows, in the remnants of Earth's military. Soldiers, engineers, civilians, all coming together with one singular goal: survival. At first, it seemed futile. Every victory came at an immense cost. But with every loss, humanity's resolve grew stronger. They adapted, built new weapons, crafted cunning tactics, and, most importantly, they learned. They learned how to fight the Zalkar. Now, here they were, Earth's last stand. A ragtag coalition of human forces, banding together in one final, desperate defense. Aisling's command ship, the Phoenix, was the last of its kind. A hybrid of stolen alien technology and human ingenuity, it was a symbol of humanity's refusal to give in. She had taken it upon herself to lead this final mission, to take the fight directly to the Zalkar flagship and put an end to their reign of terror. "We're going to die here," Lieutenant Nadezhda said, her voice tense over the comms. "Aisling, we don't have a chance. Look at that thing." Aisling turned her gaze toward the viewport, the colossal Zalkar ship hanging above like a dark omen. It was made of a material that defied all understanding, glistening with an unnatural sheen that made the human ships feel like insects in comparison. The energy emissions alone were enough to make even the bravest soldier hesitate. But there was no time for hesitation. "We don't have a choice, Nadezhda," Aisling replied, her tone steady, though her stomach twisted with doubt. "We fight. We fight until we can't anymore. That's what humans do." Another ship flew past the Phoenix, a human fighter jet weaving through the debris-laden sky. Inside, a lone pilot, Sergeant Jack Harper, maneuvered through the chaos, his every move sharp and calculated. The jet's thrusters flared as he performed a hair-raising roll, dodging the incoming fire from a Zalkar drone. The air was filled with the screams of engines, the crackle of energy blasts, and the sound of destruction. Humanity's forces had been driven to this last, desperate assault, a final attempt to turn the tide, but the enemy's superiority in both size and firepower made their chances slim. The death toll was rising with every second that passed. But then, just as Aisling began to prepare for the inevitable, something unexpected happened. The Star-Lord shifted, its massive hull rippling as though it were a living thing. Then, in a flash of blinding light, a massive energy beam shot out from the center of the ship, cutting through the human fleet with horrifying precision. Aisling felt her heart lurch. No! The beam tore through the sky, and several of the remaining human ships were obliterated in an instant. The very air around her seemed to tremble, as though reality itself was being bent by the alien force. And then, a voice echoed through the comms, cold, unyielding, and unmistakable. "Why aren't you afraid, human?" Aisling's spine stiffened, the voice sending an icy chill down her back. It wasn't the voice of a human. No, this was something else. Something ancient. Something that was watching, waiting for them to break. It was the Zalcar commander. He had spoken to her before, many times, during their failed attempts at diplomacy. His arrogance was palpable, his disdain for humanity unwavering. He had promised her, and all of Earth, annihilation. And yet, he had never fully understood the one thing that made humanity different, their unrelenting will to survive. Aisling gritted her teeth, her hands trembling slightly on the controls. "You'll find out soon enough," she whispered. "Tell me, human," the voice continued, almost amused, "why do you fight so? Your species is weak. You cannot stop us. We have destroyed worlds far greater than yours." Aisling's lips curled into a tight smile, the weight of humanity's struggle pressing down on her shoulders. But she was not about to break. "We may be weak," she said, her voice steady, defiant. "But we will never stop fighting." For a moment, the voice was silent. Then it spoke again, its tone colder than before. "I see. It is not fear that drives you. It is something worse. Your desperation. Your refusal to acknowledge your inevitable fate. It will be your undoing." Aisling's mind raced. She could feel the immense pressure mounting, the weight of humanity's survival on her shoulders. They had no backup, no reinforcements, no plan B. But they had something that the Zalcar couldn't understand, a drive that transcended logic, a refusal to be broken. And she was going to show him that. "I'd rather die on my feet than kneel before you," Aisling growled, slamming her fist into the console. The comms crackled one last time, the Zalcar's voice dripping with disdain. "Then you will die soon enough. But you will learn that your stubbornness will be the very thing that leads to your destruction." Aisling took one last look at the viewport. The Star-Lord was closing in, its weapons primed, its shields a barrier of impenetrable power. Her people were dying. But she wasn't going to let them die in vain. The decision was made. "Engage all fighters," Aisling ordered, her voice calm but filled with an unshakable resolve. "We are going to make them regret underestimating us." With that, the final battle began. Cliffhanger ending. The first wave of fighters dove toward the Star-Lord, charging into the abyss as Aisling's heart raced in her chest. The sky around them was filled with explosions, debris, and the bright flashes of battle. But then, just as victory seemed within their grasp, just as humanity's forces struck the first blow, a massive energy pulse erupted from the Zalcar flagship, and everything went dark. Aisling's comms went silent. The ships around her vanished. The light of Earth's last hope blinked out. And for a moment, all that was left was the oppressive silence of space. The reckoning had begun. Silence. Captain Aisling Ro's vision was blurred as her consciousness struggled to piece itself back together. She had been thrown from her seat by the force of the pulse, her body crashing against the bulkhead of the Phoenix. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead, but that wasn't what bothered her most. It was the cold, overwhelming emptiness around her. The comms were dead. The view screen was black. The stars, once so familiar, were now hidden behind the shadow of the Star-Lord, a behemoth that loomed large and still in the distance. The massive Zalcar flagship, which had obliterated their entire fleet with a single shot, was now bathed in an eerie, almost serene silence. There was no sound, no voice, no warning. For a split second, Aisling's heart skipped a beat. Had they won? Had the pulse just wiped out everything? Her mind raced, grasping for any sense of hope. Then her hand hovered over the controls, and she slammed the buttons in a desperate attempt to revive the comms. "Nothing. Status report," she shouted into the empty air, her voice hoarse, but there was no response. For a moment, everything felt like it was crumbling. The rebellion, the defiance, the endless struggle, it all seemed so meaningless. They had fought so hard, sacrificed so much, and yet, here they were, stranded in the vast dark, with only the chilling void of space to keep them company. Then, a soft beep. A glimmer of life. The comms crackled, and a voice came through, a strained, broken voice. "Captain. Captain Ro, do you read?" It was Lieutenant Nadezhda. Aisling's heart lurched in relief, but there was something in the tone that made her blood run cold. Nadezhda's voice was barely audible, filled with static, but there was a tremor in it, a fear that Aisling hadn't heard before. Loud and clear, "Nadezhda." What's going on? Are we? There's no time, Captain. The fleet, it's gone. Nadezhda's voice faltered, and there was a crackling sound, like a broken transmission. We're the last ones left. They're boarding us. They've breached the perimeter. Ashling's stomach twisted. What do you mean, they've breached? Before she could finish, another voice cut in, this one calm and too composed. It was familiar and chilling. Captain Rowe. It was the voice of Commander Kale, the Zalkar leader. His voice was unmistakable, cold and disinterested, as though speaking to an insect. You did not heed my warning, human. Your struggle was pointless, your sacrifices meaningless. You cannot escape what is inevitable. The end of your species. Ashling's pulse spiked, but she didn't allow herself to respond. She needed to focus. The enemy had breached the outer defenses. The Phoenix was alone. The human forces were scattered, cut off, and unable to mount a coherent defense. Don't listen to him, Ashling. Nadezhda's voice was shaky, but determined. We've got a small group still holding the forward section. We've rigged the ship's core for a detonation. We're... Stop, Ashling interrupted, her mind firing on all cylinders. Do not detonate the core. Not yet. But, Nadezhda protested, confusion and fear bleeding through the line. We have no other options. They're everywhere. We'll find another way, Ashling cut in, her voice sharp. I'll lead a team to the control room. We're not giving up. For a moment, there was silence. Then, Nadezhda's voice, quiet but resolute, came through again. Understood, Captain. But you have to know, if we fail, we won't make it out of here. None of us will. Ashling's jaw clenched, but she refused to let fear overwhelm her. Fear was a weapon the Zalkar used well, but it wouldn't work on her. Not this time. I'm not giving up. I will never give up. With a firm grip on the console, she pulled herself to her feet. Her body ached, her head pounded from the impact, but her resolve was unwavering. It was the only thing she had left. She took a deep breath, flicking the control switches that revived the comms. A message blinked onto the screen, barely legible, but enough for her to read. It was from Sergeant Jack Harper, her last remaining fighter pilot. The transmission was distorted, but his voice cut through the static with a clarity that almost made Ashling stop in her tracks. We're not done yet, Captain. I've got a dozen fighters left. We're holding on, but we're gonna need your orders if we're gonna get through this. We'll make a run on the Star-Lord. Ashling's fingers hovered over the comms for a heartbeat. She was about to respond when the sharp voice of Commander Kale sliced through the noise. I will say this one last time, human. Surrender. There is no victory in this war. Your species is weak, and your resistance is laughable. You will all die. Not today, Ashling snapped. Not while I'm still breathing. Her eyes flicked over the screen. They were running out of time. The Star-Lord was almost upon them. Humanity's forces were scattered, their fleets decimated. The core of the Phoenix was the last chance they had, but without a tactical advantage, the detonation wouldn't matter. If they didn't act fast, they'd be consumed by the very weapon they had sought to destroy. Ashling made a decision. Harper, listen to me. I need you to provide a distraction. Draw their attention away from the ship. We'll have one shot to get to the bridge. Understood, Captain. I'll do what I can. The screen flickered, and Ashling moved swiftly to the armory. A handful of soldiers remained, those too stubborn, too proud, or too desperate to abandon the fight. They would die, of course. But if they had any hope of taking down the Zalkar commander, of securing any future for humanity, it would be on their terms. The Phoenix wasn't just a ship. It was a symbol of humanity's defiance, and she was not going to let it fall quietly. Prepare for assault, she ordered, her voice firm. We're going in. Cliffhanger ending. The last of the human fighters launched from the Phoenix, streaking toward the Star-Lord in a daring attempt to breach the Zalkar flagship's outer defenses. The odds were impossibly slim, the risks beyond calculation, but they didn't have a choice. Every second counted. Ashling grabbed her pulse rifle and motioned for the team to move. Their path was clear, but ahead, the door to the command bridge loomed like an insurmountable obstacle, heavily fortified, sealed by layers of Zalcar technology. "We break through that door, or we don't leave here alive," she muttered under her breath. The blast doors rumbled open with a mechanical screech, revealing the chaos beyond. Ashling's heart raced. This was it. The point of no return. And then, just as the team pushed forward, something unexpected happened. A sharp, unnerving laugh echoed from the shadows, as if the walls themselves were mocking them. It was Kale. And this time, he wasn't speaking through the comms. "Did you really think you could win, human?" His voice filled the space, as cold as space itself. "You will never leave here alive." The door slammed shut behind them, trapping Aisling and her team inside the heart of the beast. The last stand had begun. The door slammed shut with a bone-rattling crash, sealing Aisling Rowe and her team in the heart of the Star-Lord. The hum of alien machinery reverberated in the confined space, as though the ship itself was alive, pulsating with power. Aisling's pulse quickened, the weight of their situation pressing down on her shoulders like a vice. There was no turning back now. Every movement, every decision from here on out, would either ensure their survival, or condemn them all to a death far worse than anything they had imagined. She could hear the faint sound of her teams breathing over the comms, all of them tensed, waiting for the next move. Behind them, the blast doors sealed with a hiss of air, trapping them inside. The chamber was vast, bathed in cold blue light, its walls lined with technology that was completely alien to anything humanity had ever encountered. It was like walking inside a living nightmare, a place designed to induce fear. The floor vibrated beneath their boots as though the Star-Lord was anticipating their every move, mocking them for daring to enter. "Stay close," Aisling whispered into her comms, her voice low but steady. "We breach the control room, disable their weapon systems, and then we plant the charges." "Understood," Lieutenant Nadezhda's voice crackled through, sounding far calmer than Aisling felt. "But Captain, you know what we're up against. There's no way we'll get to the core without heavy resistance." Aisling's fingers tightened around her rifle, the cold metal comforting in her grip. "Then we fight. We fight, and we make them regret ever underestimating us." The team moved forward in a loose formation, their weapons raised, scanning the surroundings for any sign of movement. The air was thick with tension, every footstep echoing in the hollow silence. Every second that passed seemed to stretch longer than the last, and Aisling could feel the walls closing in. They didn't have much time. If the Star-Lord systems were allowed to fully activate, the resulting destruction would be catastrophic, and Earth would be nothing more than a burned husk. The control room was just ahead, but they weren't alone. From the shadows, the first wave of Zalcar soldiers emerged. Their figures were monstrous, tall and unnaturally thin, with armor that shimmered like liquid metal. Their eyes glowed with an otherworldly intensity as they hissed in unison, their voices a guttural chorus that sent a chill down Aisling's spine. "Brace!" she shouted, pulling the trigger of her rifle just as the first alien warrior lunged at them. The first shot struck its chest, but the Zalcar's armor absorbed the impact with little more than a ripple. The creature barely flinched before charging again, its claws extending into lethal points. Aisling's team opened fire, their rounds impacting the enemy, but the Zalcar were relentless, their alien physiology making them incredibly difficult to neutralize. Aisling ducked behind a nearby pillar, the sound of her soldiers firing in tandem with her own shots ringing in her ears. Every pulse of gunfire felt like it might be the last, but the Zalcar pushed forward with a terrifying determination. "Fall back," Aisling ordered, raising her hand in a quick motion. "Regroup. Don't let them surround us." The team took cover as the Zalcar advanced. Aisling's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her composure. There was no room for fear now. No time for hesitation. Humanity had survived because they never gave up. They found a way, even when every possibility seemed impossible. A blast rang out from Nadezhda's direction, a powerful charge that blew a hole in the Zalcar's lines. The alien soldiers reeled, momentarily stunned by the force of the explosion. That was their opening. "Go! Go!" Aisling shouted, sprinting toward the control room's entrance. The team moved swiftly, covering each other as they advanced. The Zalcar soldiers recovered quickly, but they were slower now, their coordinated charge faltering. Aisling could see the control room just ahead, its door sliding open automatically in response to their approach. The cold metal interior of the room was a stark contrast to the chaos outside, but there was no time to marvel at the technology that lay before them. They had one objective: disable the weapon systems. Ashling's team entered the room, rifles raised, scanning the interior. The walls were lined with panels of alien glyphs, emitting a faint, unnatural light. At the center of the room was a massive console, the heart of the ship's control systems. In front of it, Kale, commander of the Zalkar, stood, his silhouette dark against the pulsing energy of the ship. "You're too late," he said, his voice smooth, mocking. "Did you really think you could win? You cannot stop what is inevitable." Ashling's hand trembled, but her grip on her rifle tightened. "I've heard that before." The Zalkar commander smiled coldly, his eyes glowing with malice. "You misunderstand, human. You are not our first experiment. You are merely the last. We have seen countless species crumble before us, their resistance crushed beneath our boots. Yours will be no different." "Maybe," Ashling said, taking a step forward, "but we're not like the others. We fight for something you'll never understand." Kale's expression shifted, just a fraction of a second, before he raised his hand in a fluid motion. The floor beneath them trembled as the control room doors slammed shut behind them. A soft hum filled the air, and suddenly, the room was bathed in red light. The final trap had been sprung. The walls shifted, and in an instant, several dozen more Zalkar soldiers materialized from the shadows, surrounding them in a perfect circle. They were everywhere, alien warriors with gleaming blades, energy rifles aimed directly at Ashling's team. It was a perfect ambush, and there was nowhere left to run. Ashling's breath caught in her throat, but she didn't back down. She had led her people this far, and she wouldn't stop now. "You are surrounded," Kale said, his voice low and almost pitying. "Your struggle is over." Ashling gritted her teeth. "Not yet." She motioned to Nadezhda, who nodded, understanding the silent command. With a swift movement, the lieutenant threw a small device to the ground, and the entire room erupted in a blinding flash of light. Ashling felt her senses overload as the world around her exploded into chaos. The air vibrated with the intensity of the blast, and the Zalkar soldiers flinched, momentarily disoriented. In that instant, Ashling and her team charged forward, taking advantage of the confusion. Their rifles fired in unison, taking down two of the closest Zalkar before the rest could fully react. But as they advanced, more Zalkar soldiers poured in, forming a defensive wall that threatened to overwhelm them. "We don't stop!" Ashling screamed, pushing forward. Cliffhanger ending. The room was a cacophony of gunfire, alien hisses, and the relentless roar of the Star-Lord systems coming online. The Zalkar forces were closing in, their numbers overwhelming. Ashling could feel the weight of the world on her shoulders, but she refused to give in. She would push forward. And then, just as it seemed they had found an opening, Kale's voice echoed across the room one final time, cutting through the chaos. "You truly believe you can win? You will die here, human. And this time, there will be no escape." With that, the ground beneath them trembled violently, and the lights flickered out, plunging them into darkness. The fight had just begun. The lights flickered once more before plunging the room into complete darkness. For a moment, there was nothing but the pounding of Ashling's heart in her chest and the sounds of her soldiers' ragged breathing. The blaring alarms of the Star-Lord's weapon systems echoed in the air, a constant reminder of how close they were to annihilation. The only source of light now came from the flashes of gunfire and the eerie, pulsing glow from the walls, creating jagged shadows that seemed to dance like specters in the corners of the room. The Zalkar soldiers moved in close, their claws scraping across the metallic floor, their energy rifles raised. They had the advantage now. Ashling and her team were surrounded. The tight formation was slowly closing in. They were running out of time. This was it. But Ashling refused to go quietly. She could feel the weight of her team's hope bearing down on her. They had come so far, made so many sacrifices, and now it was all going to end here in the shadow of the Star-Lord. If they died, humanity would be lost. But if they managed to survive, if they could hold the line just a little longer, they might just give humanity the chance it needed to turn the tide. Through the darkness, she motioned to Nadezhda, signaling the lieutenant to follow her lead. They didn't need to see to fight. They had been through worse. In the blink of an eye, they took their next step into the chaos, sprinting towards the massive console at the heart of the room, hoping it still offered any hope of stopping the inevitable. And then, the moment that would define everything happened. There was a massive shockwave, followed by a deafening explosion. The floor beneath their feet shook violently, throwing Aisling to the ground. She barely managed to roll, avoiding the blast that would have killed her. A piece of the ceiling above them crumbled, sending shards of debris crashing to the ground. For a moment, everything was chaos. When the dust settled, Aisling found herself lying on her back, staring at the ceiling. Her mind struggled to focus, to put together what had just happened. "Captain!" Nadezhda's voice was frantic, though muffled by the ringing in Aisling's ears. "We need to move." Aisling pushed herself to her feet, feeling a sharp pain shoot through her side as her ribs protested. She could barely see through the haze of smoke and debris, but she heard it, an unmistakable sound. The rumbling of footsteps. The unmistakable feeling that the walls were closing in. Cale's voice boomed through the chaos. "You cannot stop what has already begun. You should have surrendered when you had the chance." From the smoke, the Zalkar commander appeared like a shadow come to life, towering and relentless. His cold eyes glowed, burning with the promise of death. He was not the first to confront humanity with such malice, but he might just be the last. Aisling's blood ran cold at the sight of him. This was no mere battle, this was an execution. And yet, despite the overwhelming odds, there was a fire within her, a fire that refused to be snuffed out. They had come this far. They had fought too hard, sacrificed too much, to let everything fall apart now. With a final, desperate breath, Aisling raised a rifle, her hand steady despite the pain. "You don't know humanity, Cale," she spat. "We never surrender." At the word surrender, there was a movement, a shift in the air. Sergeant Jack Harper's voice came through the comms, crisp and clear, cutting through the chaos with a tone of finality. "We're in position, Captain. Taking the shot." Aisling's breath caught. There was no time to question. There was no time for second thoughts. "Do it," she ordered, her voice firm, her resolve unshakable. The Star-Lord trembled again as a single resounding blast shot through the darkness, louder than the thunder of 1,000 storms. The entire ship shook as if the blow had been struck directly at its core. The consoles flickered, their once imposing lights blinking out one by one. For a fleeting moment, the Zalkar commander faltered, his icy expression flickering with disbelief. But it wasn't enough. Aisling could see it in his eyes. He was no longer sure of his victory. Doubt was creeping in, and that meant one thing. Humanity was fighting back. With a momentary distraction, Aisling charged forward, moving with a speed that would have been impossible just moments before. She dove toward Cale, and the clash of their weapons rang out as the two combatants collided. Aisling's pulse rifle locked with Cale's energy blade, and the force of the impact sent shockwaves through her body. "You are nothing, human," Cale hissed, his voice laced with hatred. "This galaxy will bow before us, or it will burn." But Aisling refused to let him win. With a scream of defiance, she shoved him back, using the momentum of their struggle to slam her shoulder into his chest. He staggered, his balance faltering for just a split second. That was all she needed. She reached down, her hand grabbing a detonator from her belt, a last-ditch effort. In one fluid motion, she slapped it onto the exposed control panel near the core. The countdown began with an ominous whine, echoing like a death knell through the ship. "We'll see who burns, Cale," Aisling said with a savage grin. "You should have listened when I told you, humanity never surrenders." Cale's expression twisted in anger, but Aisling didn't wait for him to retaliate. With one last glance at her team, she turned and bolted toward the exit. The countdown echoed louder and louder as the ship trembled with the weight of its impending destruction. "Fall back!" she shouted to her team, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We're not finished yet." The team scrambled, pushing through the maze of corridors, the sound of their boots pounding in unison as the walls around them groaned with the stress of their failing systems. But the Zalkar were closing in, and there was no room left to maneuver. They had only one way out, the shuttle bay. Aisling's heart pounded as they reached the hangar. The massive doors were already open, but outside, waiting for them, were more Zalkar ships, their black hulls forming an impenetrable wall. There was no escape. And yet there was hope. Hope in the form of one last fighter squadron, led by Harper. They were the last line of defense, the last chance. "Ready for takeoff, Captain," Harper's voice came through the comms, calm and unwavering. Aisling's eyes flicked to the incoming blast from the Star-Lord as the countdown hit its final seconds. She made her choice. "Full throttle," she said, her voice unwavering. "Let's show them who they're messing with." Legendary final line. As the shuttle launched into the void of space, a blinding explosion erupted behind them, an entire starship consumed by humanity's last act of defiance. And the universe would never forget the day it learned what true resolve looked like.